which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Erin, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 22nd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. My first article today is Where Sharks Swimmers Meet on the East Coast by Carl Churchill and Aylin Woodward. Back-to-back shark attacks in the Florida Panhandle have left at least one swimmer in critical condition this month. But despite the clips inundating your Instagram feed, your chance of getting bitten is still small. Less than 1 in 4 million, said Gavin Naylor, director of the University of Florida's Shark Research Program. Shark populations have rebounded since the 1990s thanks to conservation efforts for both sharks and their prey. Today, some 130 species patrol the East Coast, Naylor added. Most stay at depths where they're unlikely to encounter people, but some are more likely to stray into waters with swimmers and surfers, especially at coastal hotspots. More people in the waves plus more sharks means more encounters. Throughout the year, sharks follow prey and ocean temperatures. Most great whites, for instance, go south for the winter to warmer waters near Florida. Warming sea surface temperatures mean scientists are seeing more sharks and species in places compared with a couple of decades ago, said Dean Grubbs, a shark expert and research professor at Florida State University. Young sharks tend to remain in the refuge of shallower areas near the shore where larger predators are less common. As sharks age, they can pursue a wider range of prey and expand their range. Naylor suspects that younger great whites are more likely to mistakenly bite humans as they start to mature and focus on new prey like seals. You can reduce your risk by not swimming at dawn or dusk when sharks are most active, staying close to shore and swimming in groups, said John Dodd, executive director of the Atlanta Shark Institute. Next article is Trump vents growing frustrations with reflecting pool problems. President says multiple people have been arrested for vandalism and the pool will likely need to be drained for repairs by Alyssa Lupat. President Trump poured out his frustrations with the problems plaguing the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, saying the multiple people had been arrested and would likely need to be drained for repairs. The reflecting pool on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. has been plagued by algae and a coating that is sloughing off after a recently completed $14.7 million renovation that was part of the president's project to beautify the nation's capital. On Saturday, Trump blamed the problems on the vandals, who he said cut and poured corrosive chemicals into the pool. They took some form of knife or blade and put a 250-long gash into the beautiful facade of what took so much work, competence, and money to build and complete, Trump said. It wasn't completely clear what the president meant by this. The new surface isn't plastic like a typical pool lining, which is easier to cut but is more like a coarse coat of paint. The Interior Department and the U.S. Park Police will help oversee the pool, didn't immediately return requests to provide additional details. Trump said on social media on Sunday that he inspected the pool himself. Work will begin immediately on fixing the seriously vandalized reflecting pool, he said. The reflecting pool was resurfaced this spring with an American flag blue coating. Within days of the pool's reopening this month, algae blooms coated the floor and colored the surface, drawing spectators and online mockery. Some have taken pics of the blue coating that has been floating in the water. Videos on social media showed at least one person was arrested near the pool in recent days. Under federal law, destroying government property carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Someone who causes only minor damage faces up to a year in prison and a $100,000 fine. Trump said vandals have also destroyed the grass surrounding the pool. 5 people have been arrested for vandalism as of Saturday night, a Trump administration official said. More than a dozen police reports were filed for vandalism, including one reporting a blade used to slash a section of the pool, the official said. National Park Service workers this week have been trying to clean the algae blooms off the bottom of the 2,000-foot-long pool by pouring hydrogen peroxide into the water and vacuuming the floor. Hydrogen peroxide can also be used as a paint remover. Algae thrives in warm, shallow waters, making a 3-foot deep pool an effective breeding ground. Changing the color of the basin from gray to navy blue may have had the unintended effect of making the water warmer, which can further spur algae growth. The Interior Department said last week that the pool was clear and that workers were sucking up dead algae. The government had awarded the pool resurfacing contract to Virginia-based Atlantic Industrial Coatings without a full bidding process. A local organization sued the government over the resurfacing job, claiming the Trump administration sidestepped required reviews before starting the project in April. The government finished the work before a judge had decided whether to step in. The administration has tried to move at similar speed to complete work like Trump's White House ballroom project. Charles Birnbaum, head of the Cultural Landscape Foundation, which filed a lawsuit regarding the reflecting pool, said that had the administration gone through the typical review process, we might not now be witnessing this failed renovation, which almost certainly will leave the reflecting pool in a state of despair for the nation's 250th anniversary. Next article, would-be intelligence chief in tight spot. Clayton's nomination in limbo as president fights with Congress on election legislation, by Corinne Ramey, Sadie Gurman, and James Finelli. Jay Clayton has been a loyal ally and golf buddy of President Trump. Now he is a pawn in a larger chess game between the president and Congress. Clayton has for the past 14 months led the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, where he has pulled off the delicate feat of remaining in the president's good graces while exercising some level of independence. Clayton was set to take the first step last week toward a cabinet-level post, but the president delayed his nomination to be Director of National Intelligence to force Congress to act on Trump-endorsed election legislation that currently lacks enough support to pass. Trump said he was stopping Clayton's nomination as intelligence chief until his current post as a top prosecutor was filled. That could leave Clayton, who was chairman of Securities and Exchange Commission during Trump's first term, in limbo indefinitely. The president has said he would appoint one of his personal lawyers, Sullivan and Cromwell partner James McDonald, to take Clayton's place. Many lawmakers were relieved when Trump tapped Clayton to lead the intelligence agency instead of his pick as the acting director, Bill Holt, who Democrats and some Republicans feared would politicize the post. If Holt remains in the intelligence job for any length of time, he is expected to thin the ranks of an office tasked with coordinating efforts among the administration's intelligence agencies. That would save Clayton the heartburn of making large layoffs that Trump wants, but would potentially leave him to deal with the aftermath. Clayton, 59 years old, runs a Manhattan office that has long been considered a crown jewel of the Justice Department. When the Trump administration captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in January, Clayton unveiled the new indictment accusing Maduro, his wife, and 4 other defendants of a 25-year conspiracy that involved joining with violent drug traffickers to distribute tons of cocaine to the United States. Tensions have long existed between the office, which prides itself on independence, and Justice Department headquarters in Washington. That hasn't changed even after the Trump administration broke with norms and aligned the department closely with the White House. While Clayton is well regarded, Justice Department officials in Washington have at times viewed his portfolio of cases as not sufficiently reflecting the administration's priorities, people familiar with the matter had said. Clayton has at times supported the views of his prosecutors over officials at headquarters. When Justice Department officials announced a policy for companies to report wrongdoing in exchange for not being prosecuted and said it superseded all U.S. attorney policies, Clayton continued to tout his own. 100% unequivocally fake news, Clayton said of the idea his policy no longer applied. This year, Clayton rebuffed a Justice Department request to launch an investigation related to the writer E. Jean Carroll's lawsuits against Trump, the People said, sparing his office from a political minefield. U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros in Chicago is now overseeing a probe of the Democratic billionaire Reid Hoffman's financial support for Carroll's legal efforts. Boutros has said Carroll herself isn't under investigation. Washington officials also noticed that Clayton separately didn't sign his name to an initial filing asking a judge to unseal grand jury materials related to Jeffrey Epstein. A Southern District spokesman said this was a timing issue and that Clayton signed other Epstein filings. Clayton did take on the White House's demand that he look into Epstein ties to powerful Democrats, although he hasn't taken any publicly known investigative steps to advance the probe. He publicly endorsed Trump's recent claims that California's election system is vulnerable to corruption. On the integrity side, we are doing an absolutely terrible job, and the American people are right to question it, he said recently on CNBC. His frequent appearances on the network have irked some current and former prosecutors who view his political punditry as an audition for a promotion. The Southern District spokesman said deterrence is an important part of law enforcement. Closer to home, Clayton has emphasized the importance of targeting quality-of-life crimes, such as those related to guns and drug cartels. He has touted the office's sex trafficking prosecutions and charges against alleged drug dealers in Manhattan's Washington Square Park. For us, and I mean all of us in the SDNY, the North Star is what is best for New York families, Clayton said at a Police Athletic League luncheon last year. The office has opened 29 insider trading investigations this year, up from 11 the prior year, the spokesman said. A Justice Department spokeswoman called Clayton an exceptional lawyer who has led the U.S. Attorney's Office with the most professionalism, particularly while handling cases critical to our country's national security. Next article, Newsom tries to turn federal probe into opportunity, by Laura J. Nelson, Sabrina Rodriguez, and Philip Wegman. When Gavin Newsom made the startling announcement last week that he and his wife are under federal investigation, the California governor turned to a well-worn strategy, making political hay out of confrontation with President Trump. Newsom, a Democrat, said in a social media video that Trump was behind the Justice Department probe because I am considering running for president. Less than 3 hours later, Newsom's Political Action Committee sent out a fundraising plea urging supporters to help him stand up to Trump and fight off this political witch hunt. Since Trump's return to the White House, Newsom has used his bully pulpit to position himself as one of the most prominent faces of the Democratic Party's resistance to the president. The famously torturous relationship between Trump and Newsom, including barbs traded on social media and in public, has benefits for both. Hating on Newsom and California is red meat for Trump's MAGA base, and teeing off on Trump has helped propel Newsom to the top tier of potential 2028 presidential contenders. Newsom's tactics have garnered praise from Democrats and even some Republicans who say he has used Trump's playbook to capture attention, and a few other politicians have. Steve Bannon, who appeared on Newsom's podcast last year and was formerly a senior advisor to Trump, said the governor has assumed a Trumpian attitude that treats politics as a combat sport. After Newsom was elected governor in 2018 on an anti-Trump platform, the two leaders toggled between antagonism and uneasy cooperation, including during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the two actually got along remarkably. Newsom recalled later they had a relationship reset in early 2025, shortly after Trump was inaugurated for the second time. When Trump arrived to tour the devastation from the Los Angeles County fires, Newsom showed up to greet Air Force One. The two men talked in the Oval Office the next month for more than 90 minutes as Newsom advocated for federal fire aid. The detente vanished last June when the Trump administration launched militarized immigration raids in Southern California. In response to mass protests, Trump deployed 4,000 members of the National Guard and 700 active duty Marines to Los Angeles and said that if he were the border czar, he would arrest Newsom. At a March event for his new memoir, Young Man in a Hurry, Newsom recalled that during that month, it felt like he declared war on an American city. That's when I recognized I had radically changed. In response to plans in Texas to redraw his congressional boundaries to favor Republicans, Newsom began pushing for a voter initiative that would temporarily discard California's non-partisan districts and approve maps that would tilt the scales for Democrats. He was the first leader of a Democratic state to launch a counter-offensive to Texas. As tensions rose, Newsom and his staff began trolling Trump on social media, mimicking his writing style with posts smattered with capital letters and sign-offs like, "Thank you for your attention to this matter." Mike Madrid, a California-based Republican strategist and co-founder of the anti-Trump group Lincoln Project, said the quick pivot away from good governance and fact-check websites to a more combative approach helped Newsom differentiate himself. A White House spokeswoman said Trump has worked relentlessly on behalf of all Americans, even when their local leaders like Newsom reportedly fail them. The Justice Department investigation of Newsom and his wife moves the two politicians' relationship into uncharted territory. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service began approaching more than a dozen people in the governor's orbit recently, aides to the governor said. They asked about a range of topics that dated back 5 or 6 years, including the governor's family and the business interest and taxes of his wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom. The Justice Department hasn't publicly commented on the investigation. The probe carries high stakes for Newsom, but Democratic strategists said getting ahead of the narrative allowed him to shape it and further build his name recognition. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Next article, Inside the Fight to Save Chernobyl. After Russian drone hit last year, teams battle to avert new nuclear disaster by Anastasia Malenko and Serhiy Bosek. When Ukrainian emergency workers clambered onto a damaged structure above reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, there were eerie echoes of 1986. Back then, when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union and the site was known by its Russian name, Chernobyl, firefighters suffered horrific after effects from exposure to radiation while dealing with the consequences of an explosion in the reactor. In February 2025, emergency workers again raced to help put out a fire that Ukraine said was triggered by a Russian attack drone. To tackle the fire, they climbed the confinement structure that stands taller than the Statue of Liberty and covers the destroyed reactor to prevent radiation from escaping. Over the next 2 weeks, dozens of workers from Ukrainian emergency services faced freezing winds as they battled to put out the fire that spread through the membrane between the roof and the ceiling. Climbers worked in shifts to limit radiation exposure while firefighters handed them hoses, but the water quickly turned to ice. "We just did our job," said Alexei Chuprov, one of the emergency workers. "These are simply one-of-a-kind facilities, and we can already say that fate gave us a chance to test ourselves and our colleagues to the limit." Chuprov said that he fretted most about the daunting task on the 30-story ascent up the icy metal stairs leading to the top of the confinement. "There were nerves, but once you get the hang of it, you just want to get up there faster to get to the top and to work," he said. The confinement has now been temporarily patched up, and Ukraine is asking its allies to help raise about $580 million for repairs that the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development says are needed to prevent irreversible corrosion and ensure the confinement can operate safely. In April, the U.S. announced its intention to pledge $100 million, while other contributions totaled around $80 million. Ukraine's nuclear reactors have seen a number of dangerous standoffs throughout the war, as Russia's army has occupied power stations and turned them into military bases. The biggest threat to Chernobyl, though, came from the skies. Russia is targeting Ukraine's power stations and energy grid, leaving the country heavily reliant on nuclear reactors. Ukrainian officials have accused Russia of using threats to nuclear facilities as a way to scare and pressure the West over the war in Ukraine. Since last July, Russia has focused some of its energy assaults on substations connected to Ukraine's nuclear power plants, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office said. The Chernobyl plant was fully shut in 2000, but it remains a danger because of the 200 metric tons of highly radioactive material under the original concrete shelter. A new structure costing $1.75 billion was built over the site in 2019 that is able to withstand tornadoes and forest fires, and was created so the original sarcophagus below could be slowly dismantled. Then the Russians invaded in February 2022, pouring south from Belarus. They soon occupied Chernobyl, but seemed oblivious to the situation there, digging trenches and laying mines. They didn't understand they had absolutely no idea about radiation monitoring or where they were, said emergency service worker Ole Lebedev, who lived through the Russian occupation that lasted about a month. 3 years later, at around 2 a.m. on February 14, 2025, a Russian explosive drone slammed into the confinement structure after approaching below radar level at about 280 feet, Ukrainian officials said. Lebedev was one of the first rescuers on the scene. When he entered the building that houses the destroyed reactor, he looked up and saw the frosty, dark, gray sky through the hole left by the drone. Over the next 2 weeks, Lebedev and more than 100 of his colleagues in the state emergency services worked in shifts as brief as 30 minutes to limit radiation exposure, while firefighters manned the hoses, climbers dangled from ropes, and cut the holes in the roof to put the solution on the hot spots. He worked through snow and rain, which posed risk to his rope, which could have snapped when frozen with ice, and was weighed down by water, meaning he sometimes had to drop excess rope. He recalled being struck by fear once he was almost 100 yards above ground and thought his rope had given way. A drone carrying a camera checked the rope and gave him the all clear, which allowed him to return to the task with a calmer mind. Klemensky, whose brother was diagnosed with cancer related to the original disaster, is anxious that his efforts could have exposed him to high levels of radiation. For now, war risks remain as Ukraine readies for another winter that could bring additional devastation to its grid. All of this is just political games on their part. This pressure is on the global community. They don't shy away from using such methods at all. Next article, Parents Are Pleading with School Districts to Rein in Tech by Chao Deng. Yarlev was horrified when his 7-year-old daughter showed him all the apps she could access on her Chromebook at school. She had been using the device in class for months, but only after Lev had the principal send it home did he see how distracting it was. "I was in tears," said Lev. a cardiologist and father of two who watched his daughter zone out as one of the animations sucked her in. It's like the computer stole her. Lev, 49, started reaching out to other parents here in Philadelphia's mainline suburbs, and he found hundreds of families who felt the same way. They banded together and soon showed up at a school board meeting to demand more oversight of the district's digital tools and the right to approve one-to-one devices used by their kids in class. From Los Angeles to New York, parents are rebelling against school-sanctioned Chromebooks, education apps, and Google Docs, tools they say undercut their own efforts to reduce kids' tech time. In this community outside Philadelphia, tensions boiled over in recent days as the Lower Merion School District board weighed a major policy shift, whether to repeal a policy which contained language saying parents could opt their children out of one-to-one use of the school-issued devices. More than 760 parents signed a petition to preserve the policy, and their frustration spilled into a high school auditorium on June 15th. More than 30 of them, including doctors, engineers, teachers, and self-proclaimed tech advocates, took to the microphone to plead their case. Yair Kashet, 45, an architect and father of two elementary schoolers, criticized the board for accusing parents of micromanaging policy and school spending. When the board voted 7-2 to repeal the policy with the opt-out language, the audience erupted. "Shame on you," they shouted. A district spokeswoman said that the opt-out language was outdated and that the district was working on a new policy that would create a balanced digital culture. The pushback extends beyond personal cell phones, which many districts already limit, and has spread nationally. Los Angeles parents formed Schools Beyond Screens to push for stricter school tech guidelines. Parents in New York's Westchester County want tighter Chromebook restrictions, including limits on accessible websites. And in New York City, some have asked schools to delay products and curricula based on artificial intelligence for 2 years until educators better understand them. School tech has expanded rapidly, fueled by the COVID-19 pandemic. Federal aid during the pandemic let districts buy laptops and tablets, and a multi-billion-dollar ed tech industry promised to transform teaching and help students recover lost ground. Proponents said it can elevate instruction, narrow the digital divide, help pupils with language barriers and other needs, while often supplementing, not replacing, core curriculum. Educators have mixed views. In a recent EdWeek Research Center survey, more than half said the tech had a positive impact on engagement, yet a majority said it negatively affected students' well-being. Jim Hausman, 59, a real estate entrepreneur, attributes his 6th grade son's myopia and pre-bedtime anxiety in part to the Chromebook the boy has used in school for years and brings home daily. Among the online games, Hausman and other parents said they have discovered playing on devices is Five Nights at Epstein's, in which players try to escape Jeffrey Epstein's island. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Next article, Spirit Flyers Now Winging It by Bus by Jacob Passy. Spirit Airlines was sometimes nicknamed the Greyhound of the Sky. Now that the budget carrier is gone, some former fans are turning to the real thing. For Nashville, Tennessee resident Kiana Miller, a recent Greyhound bus ride to visit friends in Atlanta cost only $75 round trip. Later this summer, she is planning to travel to New Orleans through a combination of Greyhound buses and Amtrak trains. "I've gotten funny looks from my friends," said Miller, 29, who often hopped Spirit flights. But she couldn't justify the current cost of airfare or gas. And besides, ground travel allows me to see new things. Air travel turmoil, costlier airfares, and rising gas prices this year have more Americans hopping the bus to travel. Within the first week of Spirit's demise in early May, Flix North America, which operates the Flix bus and Greyhound lines, said it saw a 30% increase in passengers from the previous year across the roughly 130 routes that overlapped with Spirit. Online search activity rose by 20%. Bus operators see opportunities in broader air travel headaches, too. Government shutdowns over the past year have left travelers waiting in hours-long lines or stranded by canceled flights, leading some to search for more reliable, lower-stress alternatives. Airlines' shift away from short-haul flights in recent years has also spurred interest in buses, executives said. When you do see friction added to the air travel experience, the bus industry certainly benefits, said Fred Ferguson, chief executive of the American Bus Association trade group. Bus companies are pushing to capitalize, with Flixbus and Greyhound adding a net 25 new lines across the U.S. and Canada this year after adding 16 in 2025. Operators are upgrading vehicles to move beyond perceptions of aging fleets and dingy stations. Flix's Greyhound purchased 181 new buses over the past 2 years, equipped with more comfortable seating and better Wi-Fi, and plans to buy 85 more this year. Our price is a fraction of railways and airlines, and clearly budget matters, said Kai Boyson, Flix North America's CEO. The motor coach industry, including intercity buses and charter coaches, recorded 43.9 billion passenger miles in 2025, about 9% more than a year earlier, according to a report from the American Bus Association Foundation. That figure represents the cumulative distance traveled by customers. Last year's total was 37% lower than the 69.6 billion miles traveled in 2015. But it was more than twice the COVID-19 diminished level in 2020. Fallout from the pandemic caused about half of the country's roughly 3,000 intercity bus operators and charter companies to fold. Bolt Bus, a former Greyhound subsidiary, ceased operations in 2021, the same year that Flix acquired Greyhound. The parent company of Megabus declared bankruptcy in 2024, citing pressures from the pandemic. Pricier fuel has put pressure on bus operation profits this year, but the higher costs aren't always passed on to travelers via higher fares. At Our Bus, a New York City-based intercity bus operator, the average fare paid by riders was $36 in May, down from $39 a year earlier, the company said. When Chairman Sperrio needed to go from her Orlando area home to Atlanta last month, a $90 Greyhound ticket was less than half the cost of a flight, she said. But she was surprised that she had to load her bags onto the bus herself, and that her seat couldn't recline for the overnight ride. Nevertheless, she isn't ruling out future bus trips. Had my expectations been different, it would have been better, the 50-year-old entrepreneur said. But when I look at the value, it's worth every penny. Past run-ups in gasoline prices have boosted the bus industry, said Joseph Schwederman, director of DePaul University's Chaddock Institute for Metropolitan Development. During the early 2010s, turmoil in the Middle East drove up gas prices and helped pave Megabus's rise in the United States, he said. The longer gasoline prices remain elevated, the more likely they are to drive a sustained boom in bus travel. Unlike with flights, travelers tend to book bus rides much closer to the day of their trips. A majority of ticket sales through Wanderoo, a search platform for bus and train travel, occur within 72 hours of departure. The fuel price increase is one of the things that drove Spirit under, said Axel Hellman, co-founder of Our Bus. The fuel price increase is also driving people to bus travel. Buses become particularly attractive to travelers going less than 300 miles, said Andrew Savica, CEO of Wanderoo. Those kinds of trips are where people are substituting buses for personal or perhaps rental cars. Savica said, for true cross-country trips, it's going to take a lot to get someone to make the choice instead to spend 3 days on an intercity bus. Erica and Jane Clough had no regrets about taking the bus earlier this month for a 2-night trip to New York from Maine. The couple scored tickets with extra legroom and free snacks for $188 each with premium operator CNJ bus lines. Despite some traffic, the couple arrived relaxed, ready to visit their grandson, check out museums, and see a show. "It was lovely," said Jane, 79. "They even had Cheez-Its." Article, "String of Hits Gives Hollywood Best Box Office Since Pre-COVID" by Ben Fritz. Chris Randleman is feeling excited about the movie business for the first time since the pandemic kicked off a decade full of challenges, including theater shutdowns, Hollywood labor strikes, and rising competition from streaming. "We went through 5 years of pain," said the chief revenue officer of the Flicks Brewhouse cinema chain. "Now we're up huge." A resurgent year at the box office hit new heights this weekend, as Disney's Toy Story 5 opened to an estimated $312 million globally, the second best debut ever for a Pixar animated film. The best was Inside Out 2 in 2024. Domestically, the sequel launched with $160 million, making it the biggest opening for any film in the United States and Canada since a Minecraft movie in April 2025. Many event films this year have met or exceeded the industry's lofty expectations, including Project Hail Mary, the Super Mario Galaxy movie, Michael, and The Devil Wears Prada 2. The past few weeks have also seen 2 low-budget horror movies, Backrooms and Obsession, become unanticipated blockbusters. Total domestic box office so far this year is an estimated $4.46 billion, the highest since 2019, according to RunTrack. Inflation has played a role, but not as much as growing attendance. The average adult ticket price has risen 3% from last year to $13.44, and the number of tickets sold is up 7% to 312 million, according to research firm Intelligence. Executives now project total domestic box office this year will come close to or exceed $10 billion. The highest post-pandemic total previously was $8.9 billion in 2023. Receipts are still below the late 2010s, when total ticket sales exceeded $11 billion for 5 consecutive years. Many in the industry believe they will never get back to the heights of that era, when mega franchises like Avengers, Star Wars, and Fast and Furious consistently succeeded. For the past few years, despite blockbusters like Top Gun Maverick and a Minecraft movie, the industry has frequently gone weeks without a hit. This summer looks different, though it's early in the May-September season when the movie industry typically earns about 40% of its total box office for the year. Most major coming releases are already selling tickets. Based on pre-sales, expectations are huge for Spider-Man Brand New Day, big for The Odyssey, and solid for other big budget releases like Supergirl, Minions and Monsters, and the live-action remake of Moana, according to people in the movie industry. The only big-budget summer flops have been Disney's Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu, which fell dramatically after a solid start, and Amazon.com's 1980s toys adaptation, Masters of the Universe. Many in the industry attribute this year's boom to the fact that Hollywood has released more movies than in any year since 2019. More at-bats bring more chances for hits, particularly unexpected ones like Backrooms. The great news is it has become numerous films from different genres accounting for the success, said Michael Polidoros, chief executive of cinema marketing agency Paper Airplane. The cost of tickets for the best screenings of IMAX movies like The Odyssey and December's Dune Part 3 have reached as high as $50 and more on resale markets. But theaters are also pushing discounts for weekday showings and people who join loyalty programs. Industry veterans say several factors have been drawing audiences to theaters, including uplifting stories about human cooperation, Hail Mary, millennial nostalgia, Prada, and digitally native material and talent that appeal to Gen Z obsession. With the Toy Story series, Disney has displayed unusual restraint by making only a handful of sequels in the past 30 years. Each feels like more of a special event than high-frequency franchises like Marvel and Minions. Generation X and Millennials have nostalgia for Toy Story movies they saw in their youth. The prior 4 movies constitute the most watched film franchise on Disney Plus, and Toy Story consumer projects generate more than $1 billion in annual sales, according to the company. Toy Story 5 is the only animated film currently in theaters for families. Reviews were overwhelmingly positive for the sequel about a tablet invading the world of Jessie, Woody, and Buzz Lightyear. Families made up 55% of the audience, Disney said, and opening night crowds gave it an average grade of A, according to market research firm CinemaScore. This feels like a franchise that people have grown up with and stuck with, but also one that's bringing in new fans, said Disney's distribution president Andrew Cripps. Next article, Wyndham Clark wins the U.S. Open. The 32-year-old American held his nerve in the final round to claim his second career major victory by Andrew Beaton. Last year, Wyndham Clark was the talk of the golf world for all the wrong reasons. During the final round of the PGA Championship in 2025, he angrily flung his driver near a volunteer so hard that it damaged a sign and snapped the head off the club's shaft. Then, after missing the cut at the 2025 U.S. Open, he trashed a locker in Oakmont and received a ban from the club. But on Sunday at this year's U.S. Open, Clark's nerves faced an entirely different test as he watched an enormous lead nearly evaporate at Shinnecock Hills Golf Club before the 32-year-old American kept it together and captured the second major of his career. Clark held on for a wire-to-wire victory at 4 under par, but it wasn't the cakewalk it was shaping up to be entering the final round. After leading by 6 strokes through 54 holes, his advantage over Sam Burns was down to just 1 after only 5 holes. Burns was 7 shots back entering the day, ultimately finished 1 back. For Clark, who had previously won the 2023 U.S. Open at Los Angeles Country Club, the victory marked a return to the pinnacle of golf after his career had spun off track. When Clark won his first major back then by holding off Rory McIlroy by 1 stroke, it was a breakout moment for an up-and-comer. One of the biggest hitters on tour, Clark had everything it takes to be one of the game's top players. And he built on that with a strong 2024 that included a win at Pebble Beach, where he set the single-round record with a 12 under par 60. But that form didn't continue, especially in majors. In fact, entering this week, he had just 1 top 20 finish at a major since his victory. Those struggles also led to a couple of ugly incidents. After the 2025 PGA Championship at Quail Hollow, he apologized for chucking his club, writing on social media that, as professionals, we are expected to remain professional even when frustrated, and I unfortunately let my emotions get the best of me. My actions were inappropriate and uncalled for, he added, making it clear that I have things I need to work on. Barely a month later came the incident in Oakmont, which reportedly required him to pay for the damages, make a charitable donation, and undergo anger management in order to return. With all of that in the past, Clark hoped to use this year's U.S. Open as a chance to rewrite his story. That was a really challenging time and something I've deeply regretted, he said. I've really come a long way, and I'm excited for this year's Open for some redemption. That's exactly what he was on track to do for the first 3 days at Shinnecock. In particularly, he steeled himself during a 3rd round when he kept missing fairways but managed to save par after par. Going into Sunday, he was at 7 under and 6 shots clear of 4 players. including world number 1 Scottie Scheffler, who had the career Grand Slam on the line. For much of the final round, though, Clark wasn't able to summon that same sort of magic. He carded 3 bogeys on the opening 9 without a birdie. Meanwhile, Burns, Clark's teammate at the 2023 Ryder Cup, was surging up the leaderboard. It placed Clark on the brink of one of the biggest collapses major golf has ever seen. Going into the tournament, 21 players had led by 6 or more entering the final round of a major and had lost Greg Newman at the 1996 Masters when Nick Faldo came out on top. Making matters worse, the crowd at Shinnecock was openly rooting against Clark at times. In one instance, fans cheered when his ball rolled off the green. It wasn't any less stressful after the turn. When Burns barely missed a putt at the 18th that would have tied the lead, Clark was still just up 1 with 3 holes to play, and he was on the verge of giving back more ground when he badly mishit his drive on the par 5, 16th into the fescue. That's when he made the shots that saved his tournament. He somehow muscled his ball into the fairway, and then he found the green with his next shot. From there, he sunk a 24-footer to go back up by 2. That gave him enough breathing room to survive a bogey on the 17th, bringing the lead back down to 1 hole left. No lockers would be in danger at Shinnecock. Clark was a U.S. Open champion once again. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Article, His Dad is a Legend in Green Bay. He's Forging His Own Path by Andrew Beaton. Long before he pulled on a jersey to represent the United States in the World Cup, Alex Freeman was a Florida kid who played all kinds of other sports: tennis, basketball, and the game that made his father a Super Bowl legend. Over 9 years in the NFL, mostly with the Green Bay Packers, Antonio Freeman led the NFL in receiving yards in 1998 and set a then Super Bowl record with an 81-yard touchdown haul from Brett Favre. Everyone assumed his son, a gifted athlete, would follow in his footsteps, at least until Alex had a talk with his father about what he really hoped to pursue. It was football, just the other kind. I always had a secret love for soccer, Freeman said. At the time, I had to pick. I think soccer was the clear choice by far. Freeman had his father's blessing, and the long-term effects of that decision have never been clearer. The 21-year-old right back has emerged as one of the U.S. national team's breakout players at its home World Cup. On Friday at Lumen Field, Freeman headed home the second goal in the Americans' 2-0 victory over Australia and guaranteed the team's spot in the knockout rounds of this tournament. Earlier in the game, Freeman had made a potentially goal-saving play with a sliding block on one of the best chances of the afternoon. And last week, he also notched an assist in the opening win over Paraguay, all of which adds up to an outsized contribution for a player who only made his national team a year ago. He's got a fantastic future, U.S. forward Fullerin Balogun said. Freeman came up through the youth academy at Orlando City of Major League Soccer, and it's no surprise he wasn't on the Stars and Stripes radar until fairly recently. He didn't even make his first MLS start until 15 months ago. Freeman scored his first goal in the same game. From then on, he was a regular in the lineup, and he finished the 2025 campaign as the MLS Young Player of the Year, which was enough for him to move to Spanish club Villarreal. It was such a meteoric sight. The U.S. manager Mauricio Pochettino had hardly seen more than a few clips of him, so as he scoured the ranks of American soccer to test potential candidates of his World Cup squad last year, he had to rely on his relationship with Orlando City's Colombian manager, Oscar Pareja. Trust me, was Pareja's message to him, take Freeman. It's difficult to explain his evolution, Pochettino said. He's an amazing player for me who has the potential to be one of the best players at his position in the world. Freeman credits his father, a member of the Packers Hall of Fame, for teaching him the fine art of becoming a professional athlete. That includes everything from eating right to putting in the extra work outside of training sessions. The elder Freeman should know. During his NFL days, he became a Super Bowl champion in human highlight reel. He once made such a ridiculous overtime catch against the Minnesota Vikings, the legendary broadcaster Al Michaels couldn't believe his eyes. Freeman had hit the turf, corralled a ball that bounced off him twice, sprang to his feet, and sprinted into the end zone. He did what Michaels said? Unbelievable. Years later, Antonio Freeman is back roaming NFL stadiums to watch his son play. He even ventured into Packers enemy territory for the final U.S. tune-up game against Germany at Soldier Field, home of the Chicago Bears. And on Friday in Seahawks country, Alex managed to emulate his father in a way that should have been impossible, considering they picked different sports. Both Freeman have now scored in Seattle. That just shows how he can be great, Alex said, but I can be great in my own way as well. 1,424 receiving yards for the Packers' Antonio Freeman in 1998 to lead the NFL. A Disease's Lifetime Enemy by Karen Torgal. In the summer of 1916, a major polio epidemic in the U.S. left almost 6,000 people dead and 20,000 permanently paralyzed. The outbreak began in New York City, and its severity prompted unprecedented moves by authorities to control transmission of the disease. On July 4th, the New York Times headline proclaimed, "Ban all children from movies and paralysis war." Polio is a highly infectious viral disease. While many who contract it experience mild symptoms, for some it results in serious damage to nerve cells that control muscles. Children are particularly vulnerable. Before the development of preventative vaccines, polio epidemics left many young patients unable to walk. Others required the use of crutches, wheelchairs, and in the most extreme cases, artificial breathing machines known as iron lungs. Ignorant of what caused the disease and how it was spread during the 1916 crisis, New York City administrators killed thousands of stray dogs and cats and blasted sidewalks with water. Children leaving the city had to carry medical certificates stating they were symptom-free. Violent attacks were carried out by fearful New Yorkers against Italian immigrants who were wrongly accused of being reservoirs of infection. Polio outbreaks continued throughout the 1920s. Franklin D. Roosevelt contracted the disease in 1921 and suffered partial paralysis for the rest of his life. Parents became fearful of letting their children play outside. The lasting remedy came with the development of 2 vaccines in the 1950s, and Albert Sabin, Karen Torgal, an epidemiologist and historian of science, offers a detailed history of Sabin's oral vaccine, which he developed at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center around the same time that Jonas Salk was developing an injectable vaccine at the University of Pittsburgh. The research projects would lead to the elimination of polio from the U.S. by the early 1990s. In 2023, there were 12 documented cases of wild polio worldwide, and the disease is now on the verge of global eradication. Today, Salk, 1914 to 1995, is the figure most remembered for the successful creation of a polio vaccine. In her compelling biography of the lesser-known innovator Sabin, 1906 to 1993, Ms. Torgal draws on a range of sources to correct the balance. She introduces readers to a passionate, driven scientist through the story of his life's work. He was born Abram Saperstein, now in Poland, then part of Russia. When he was 12, he and his family fled anti-Semitic in their hometown and set out to join relatives in America, a risky journey that took nearly 2 years in total. Ms. Torgal recounts now, upon their arrival at Ellis Island in 1921, immigrants were scrutinized for signs of disease. Following devastating polio breakouts in the influenza pandemic of 1918 to 1920, anxiety over immigration had grown, and public health officials had become increasingly cautious. The family took the name Sabine and settled in Paterson, New Jersey, where Abram, now called Albert, became an accomplished high school student. After reading Microbe Hunters, Paul de Criff's popular 1926 account of pioneers in microbiology, Sabine found his calling. He enrolled at the New York University School of Medicine. Working evenings at the Harlem Hospital, he invented a method for characterizing bacterial organisms in patients with pneumonia. publishing his first paper at the age of 21. As a young doctor, Sabin became familiar with the suffering of those afflicted by polio following a 1931 outbreak and resolved to focus his research on the disease. Working first at the Rockefeller Institute and after 1939 in Cincinnati, he developed a new virus verification method. His polio research was interrupted by World War II, during which he worked on a vaccine for Japanese encephalitis. Resuming his polio project after the war, he concluded by the early 1950s that eradication would only be achieved if transmission could be prevented through halting viral replication in the gastrointestinal tract. Meanwhile, Salk's injectable vaccine, which used formalin to inactivate the virus, was approved in 1955. Sabin believed that global elimination of the polio required oral vaccine compromising weakened live polio viruses. His lab produced these strains, which he tested in monkeys and subsequently on himself and his children. He went on to test a candidate polio vaccine in countries like Poland, Yugoslavia, Switzerland, and the Belgian Congo. But Salk's approach initially had the upper hand. In 1954, Life magazine described Salk as the man who had conquered polio. Unfortunately, his vaccine had advanced into the clinic prematurely. Some batches did not fully inactivate the virus, and in 1955, the vaccine resulted in 10 deaths and 200 vaccine-related cases of polio paralysis. Sabin saw his opportunity and undertook his unprecedented act of cooperation with the Cold War era Russia. In 1956, he began working with Mikhail Chumakov, a prominent Soviet virologist. The result was more than 37 million Soviet citizens were vaccinated with the Sabin vaccine. As Sabin marked in 1959 interview with Pravda, the live vaccine was born in the U.S. but baptized in the USSR. Sabin's vaccine had several advantages over Salk's. It was cheaper and faster to manufacture, could be administered without medical training, and most important, prevented transmission. Sabin's vaccine was fully approved for use in the U.S. in 1961. But despite its effectiveness in eliminating polio, the live virus occasionally mutated back into its pathogenic form, resulting in rare cases of vaccine-related polio, something that Sabin refused to acknowledge. While statistically insignificant in the population level, such cases were devastating for affected individuals. The remarkable story of success and tragedy narrated by Ms. Torgo provides valuable insight into the power and complexity of modern medicine. As the rationale foundations of clinical research continue to be challenged and undermined, her book reminds us of science's singular ability to address problems of civilization importance. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 22nd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. and Friday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Erin. Thank you for listening.